They handed me my 12th rejection in the same room with the flickering light they never bothered fixing. I didn't even have to open the folder. I already knew. It wasn't me. Again. The guy who got it? Blake. 14 months at the company. No leadership experience. But he plays racquetball with our VP. That was the moment something inside me snapped. But I didn't flip the table. I smiled. And that was the beginning of their downfall. Oh, and I should probably introduce myself. My name is Matt Connolly, and I'm 34 years old. For the past 6 years, I've been a strategic analyst at Stonebridge Insight Group, a mid-sized consulting firm in New Jersey. I was the guy they called when projects went sideways. The fixer. The one who could untangle impossible spreadsheets and make sense of data that made other people's eyes glaze over. I was reliable, professional, and according to every performance review, invaluable to the team. But apparently, not valuable enough to promote. 6 years. 6 long years of watching people waltz into corner offices while I stayed in the same cramped cubicle with the broken chair that squeaked every time I leaned back. I'd trained 7 of the 12 people who got promoted ahead of me. 7. I'd literally taught them how to do their jobs, watched them stumble through presentations I could have delivered in my sleep, and then congratulated them when they got the positions I'd been passed over for. The reasons for my rejections changed like the weather. First, it was my leadership skills needed more development. Then I needed more technical expertise. After that, they wanted someone with a different background. Once, HR actually told me I was too specialized for management, too specialized at the thing they hired me to specialize in. Each rejection came with the same hollow promises. Next time, Matt, you're definitely on our radar. Keep doing what you're doing. But next time never came. And I was starting to realize it never would. Blake Matthews got my job. Blake, who still asked me how to format pivot tables. Blake, who'd been at the company for barely over a year and whose biggest achievement was organizing the Office Fantasy Football League. But Blake had something I didn't have. Access. He played racquetball with Martin Voss, our VP, every Thursday. He went to the same gym as Gerald Whitaker, our CEO. He knew their kids' names and asked about their golf games. I knew how to save the company money and keep clients happy. Apparently, that was less important than knowing Gerald's handicap. The meeting where they delivered rejection number 12 lasted exactly 4.5 minutes. Gerald sat behind his mahogany desk, not making eye contact, while Martin stood by the window pretending to be interested in the parking lot. The folder sat between us like a small coffin. Matt, we appreciate everything you do here, Gerald began, using the same tone people use when they're about to put their dog to sleep. But we've decided to go with Blake for the senior analyst position. I didn't respond immediately. I sat there, looking at these 2 men who'd made a career out of managing other people's talent while contributing nothing meaningful themselves. Gerald, who hadn't had an original idea since the Clinton administration. Martin, whose strategy meetings were legendary for their complete lack of strategy. Then I did something I'd never done before in a professional setting. I laughed. Not a polite chuckle or a nervous giggle. A real laugh, deep and genuine and completely inappropriate for the situation. Both of them stared at me like I'd started speaking in tongues. Sorry, I said, wiping my eyes. It's just, Blake, really? Gerald's face turned the color of overcooked salmon. Matt, I know you're disappointed, but... Disappointed? I interrupted, still chuckling. Gerald, I'm not disappointed. I'm liberated. I stood up, straightened my tie, and walked to the door. Before leaving, I turned back with the biggest smile I'd worn in years. Gentlemen, this has been educational. Truly. The drive home that day was the first time in 6 years I didn't feel the familiar knot of anxiety in my stomach. Instead, I felt something else. Something dangerous. I felt free. That evening, I called my cousin Jaden. He's a financial lawyer, one of those sharp guys who can smell opportunity from 3 states away. I'd always admired his ruthless clarity about business. When I told him what happened, he was quiet for a long moment. So what's your plan? He finally asked. I don't have one. Maybe I should just start looking for another job. Matt, he said, and I could hear him settling into what I called his lawyer voice. "You don't need to leave. You just need to stop giving your best work to people who don't deserve it." "What do you mean?" "I mean, you've spent 6 years making other people look good, making the company money, solving their problems, and what has it gotten you? Maybe it's time they remembered what life looks like without you." We talked for 2 hours that night. Jaden helped me see things differently. I wasn't trapped at Stonebridge. I was embedded there. I knew every system, every client relationship, every process that kept the lights on. I was infrastructure. And infrastructure, when it disappears, leaves a very big hole. Over the next few days, I started paying attention to things I'd previously taken for granted. I was the only person who knew how to generate the monthly performance reports that Gerald presented to the board. I was the primary contact for 4 of our biggest clients, including Lake Haven Medical and Echelon Partners, who brought in about 40% of our annual revenue. I was the one who developed the data analysis protocols that made our presentations look professional instead of like something a freshman business student had thrown together. I'd made myself indispensable without realizing it. And indispensable people, as I was about to learn, have more power than they think. But I wasn't going to be reckless about this. If I was going to extract myself from Stonebridge, I was going to do it right, surgically, professionally, in a way that left no room for legal complications or burned bridges. Well, no unnecessarily burned bridges. I gave myself 6 months to execute what I started thinking of as my quiet exit. Phase 1 was increasing my value while simultaneously becoming less replaceable. Instead of training other people on my systems, I started keeping more detailed notes for myself. When Blake asked me to show him how to pull client satisfaction metrics, I told him I was swamped but would get to it next week. Next week became next month. Next month became when things slow down. I started scheduling more face-to-face meetings with our key clients, not to poach them, not yet, but to strengthen relationships. I wanted them to associate our successes with me personally, not just with Stonebridge as a company. I took Lake Haven's CFO to lunch and learned about their expansion plans. I attended Echelon's quarterly review and made suggestions that saved them significant money on their Q4 reporting. Meanwhile, I began laying the groundwork for my own consulting practice. I registered Signal North Consulting as an LLC, created a basic website, and started reaching out to former colleagues who'd left Stonebridge over the years. The conversations were enlightening. Everyone had similar stories about being overlooked, undervalued, or pushed out to make room for less qualified but better connected people. The most interesting conversation was with Nina Rhodes, who'd been a brilliant project manager before leaving Stonebridge 2 years earlier. She'd been passed over for promotion 3 times before finally giving up and taking a position with a smaller firm. When I told her what I was planning, she was immediately interested. "You know what your problem was, Matt?" she said during our coffee meeting. "You were too good at your job. You made it look easy, so they thought anyone could do it. They never realized how much skill was involved in making it look effortless." Nina had a point. I'd spent years making Gerald and Martin look competent by handling the details they couldn't grasp. I'd written reports they presented as their own insights. I'd solved problems they didn't even know existed. I was the engine that made their executive-level car run smoothly. But engines, I realized, could be removed and installed elsewhere. Phase 2 of my plan involved emotional detachment. This was harder than I'd expected. For 6 years, I'd cared deeply about Stonebridge's success. I'd stayed late to fix problems, come in early to prep for big presentations, and genuinely invested myself in making the company better. Breaking that emotional connection felt like ending a long relationship. I stopped volunteering for extra projects. When Martin asked me to analyze a potential acquisition, I told him I was at capacity with my current workload. When Gerald needed someone to handle a client crisis on a weekend, I mentioned that I had family commitments. These weren't lies, exactly, but they weren't the whole truth either. The whole truth was that I was done prioritizing their problems over my own life. The change in their behavior was immediate and telling. Suddenly, I was getting urgent emails about projects that could have waited weeks. Martin started dropping by my desk more frequently, asking about timelines and deliverables. Gerald actually complimented my work in a team meeting, something that had happened maybe twice in 6 years. They were starting to notice my absence. Even though I was still physically present and meeting all my obligations, I was just no longer exceeding them. And for the first time, they were experiencing what Matt Conley at baseline looked like instead of Matt Conley going above and beyond. The third phase was the hardest to execute because it required perfect timing. I needed to leave at a moment when my departure would cause maximum disruption while maintaining my professional reputation. I couldn't storm out dramatically or give them ammunition to claim I was unprofessional or unstable. The opportunity came during our quarterly planning meeting in late September. Gerald was presenting growth projections to the board, using analysis I'd prepared but hadn't been credited for. As he clicked through slides explaining market trends and client satisfaction metrics, I realized this was probably the last time I'd watch someone else take credit for my work. After the meeting, I requested a private conversation with Gerald and Martin. I'd rehearsed this moment for weeks, but when it came time to speak, the words felt surprisingly natural. "I'm submitting my resignation," I said, placing a letter on Gerald's desk. "My last day will be October 31st. The silence that followed was profound. Martin actually dropped his coffee mug, sending ceramic shards skittering across the floor. Gerald opened and closed his mouth several times before finding his voice. "Matt, why? Is this about the promotion? Because we can discuss—" "It's not about the promotion," I interrupted. "It's about opportunity. I've received an offer I can't refuse." This wasn't technically true. I hadn't received an offer from another company, but I had received an offer from myself, and I definitely couldn't refuse that. "What kind of offer?" Martin demanded, his face flushing red. "I'm starting my own consulting practice. I'll be focusing on strategic analysis for mid-market companies." The temperature in the room seemed to drop by 10 degrees. Gerald and Martin exchanged looks that could have powered a small city. "Matt," Gerald said carefully, "I hope you understand your non-compete obligations." "I never signed a non-compete agreement," I replied calmly. "I checked with legal before making this decision." This was true. In their rush to get me started 6 years ago, they'd somehow forgotten to include a non-compete clause in my employment contract. It was an oversight that was about to cost them significantly. Over the next hour, they tried everything. They offered me the associate director position they'd been dangling for 2 years. They proposed a 20% salary increase. Martin even suggested creating a new role specifically for me. But I'd moved past the point where their offers could reach me. "This isn't a negotiation," I told them finally. "This is a notification." The next 2 weeks were fascinating to observe. Word of my resignation spread through the office like wildfire, and suddenly everyone wanted to know what I'd be doing next. Some people seemed genuinely happy for me. Others appeared nervous, probably realizing that their own job security might be more precarious than they'd thought. Blake, interestingly, seemed the most shaken by the news. He cornered me by the coffee machine on my third to last day. "Matt, man, I had no idea you were thinking about leaving," he said, fidgeting with his tie. "I mean, congratulations and everything, but you're not leaving because of the promotion thing, are you?" "Not at all," I assured him. "This is about new opportunities." Right. Good for you." He paused, clearly struggling with something. "Listen, would you maybe have time to show me how to run those monthly reports before you go? I think they're going to want me to handle them." I smiled. "I'll see what I can do." "Blake?" Of course, I didn't have time. My remaining days were packed with exit interviews, documentation handovers, and transition meetings. Or at least, that's what I told him. The real reason I didn't train Blake on the reports was simpler. I wanted Stonebridge to understand exactly what they were losing. And the best way to demonstrate value is to remove it and see what breaks. My last day arrived faster than I'd expected. There was a small farewell gathering in the conference room, complete with cake and awkward speeches. Gerald said nice things about my contributions to the company. Martin thanked me for my years of dedicated service. Several colleagues wished me luck with my new venture. But the most memorable moment came when Sarah from accounting pulled me aside. "Matt," she said quietly, "I just want you to know that some of us have always noticed how much you do around here. How much you make other people look good. I think they're going to figure out real quick what they've lost." She was right. But even I was surprised by how quickly reality set in. The first crisis hit on my third day of freedom. Lake Haven Medical's CFO called Gerald directly, asking why their quarterly analysis was 3 days late. Gerald, who'd never run the reports himself, scrambled to find someone who could fill in. Unfortunately, the only person who truly understood the system was now sitting in a coffee shop in downtown Princeton, reviewing business plans for Signal North Consulting. Blake tried his best, but his best produced a report that somehow concluded Lake Haven had negative customer satisfaction and a profit margin of 847%. Gerald caught the errors before the report went to the client, but not before realizing that replacing me might be more complicated than he'd anticipated. The second crisis followed within a week. Echelon Partners had questions about their market positioning analysis, which I'd prepared but never fully documented for others. The analysis included proprietary algorithms I'd developed and data sources I'd cultivated over years of client work, without me there to explain the methodology. The recommendations looked like random numbers arranged in aesthetically pleasing charts. By the end of my second week of freedom, Gerald was calling me directly. "Matt, I know you're busy getting your new business started," he began, trying to sound casual. "But we're having some transitional challenges. Would you be available for some short-term consulting work? We'd pay your standard rate." Of course, I'd been expecting this call. "What's your timeline?" I asked. "Well, we need some help with the Lake Haven reports, and maybe some documentation of your analysis processes. Nothing too time-intensive." "My consulting rate is $300 per hour," I said, with a 4-hour minimum per session. There was a pause. "300? That's significantly higher than your previous salary." "Gerald, I'm not your employee anymore. I'm a consultant. Different market, different rates." He agreed. Of course, they didn't have a choice. I spent exactly 12 hours over 3 sessions helping them understand systems I'd built and processes I'd developed. It felt strange being back in the Stonebridge offices as a visitor, watching my former colleagues struggle with work that had become second nature to me. During my final consulting session, Martin made what I suspected was a last-ditch recruitment attempt. "You know, Matt, we're still interested in that director position we discussed. The offer stands if you want to come back." "I appreciate that," I said, packing up my laptop. "But I'm committed to my current path." What I didn't tell him was that my current path was about to intersect with Stonebridge's in ways they couldn't imagine. The breakthrough came during a coffee meeting with Lake Haven's CFO, Janet Morrison. I'd maintained my relationship with her throughout the transition, and she'd been increasingly frustrated with the quality of analysis coming from Stonebridge since my departure. "Matt, can I ask you something directly?" she said, stirring her latte. "Would Signal North be interested in taking over our strategic analysis work?" This was the moment I'd been building toward for months, but hearing the question asked so directly still sent a jolt of excitement through me. "We'd certainly be interested in discussing it," I said carefully. "What kind of scope are you thinking about?" The conversation that followed was everything I'd hoped for and more. Lake Haven wasn't just dissatisfied with Stonebridge's recent work, they were actively looking for a new partner. The reports they'd been receiving were inconsistent, the insights were superficial, and the response time for questions had increased dramatically. "Frankly," Janet said, "we're paying for premium service and getting amateur results. When you were handling our account, we felt like we had a real strategic partner. Now it feels like we're just another client getting generic templates." 2 weeks later, Lake Haven Medical officially terminated their contract with Stonebridge and signed with Signal North Consulting. The contract was worth more annually than my entire previous salary, and it was just the beginning. Echelon Partners followed within a month. Their transition was even smoother because I'd maintained detailed documentation of their preferences and requirements. What had taken Stonebridge teams of people to deliver, I could now handle more efficiently with targeted expertise and personal attention. The domino effect was swift and satisfying. Gerald called me frantically after losing the second major client. "Matt, what the hell is going on? Lake Haven and Echelon were our biggest accounts. This is unprecedented." "I'm sure you'll adapt," I said calmly. "Stonebridge has a lot of talented people. Don't play games with me. You know exactly what's happening here." He was right. Of course. But he was also powerless to stop it. I hadn't violated any agreements because I'd never signed any. I hadn't poached clients because they'd approached me. I hadn't badmouthed Stonebridge because I didn't need to. Their work spoke for itself. The third major client departure happened 2 months later, but this one was different. Morrison Industries hadn't been my direct account, but they'd been impressed by my work on collaborative projects. When they heard through industry connections that I was now independent, they reached out directly. This pattern continued throughout the winter. By March, Signal North had grown from a one-person operation to a team of 5, including Nina Rhodes as my operations director. We'd secured 8 major clients, 6 of whom had previously worked with Stonebridge in some capacity. The turning point came when Blake called me in April. He'd been struggling at Stonebridge since my departure, trying to fill shoes that were several sizes too large for his experience level. The conversation was awkward, but illuminating. "Matt, I need to be honest with you," he said during our lunch meeting. "Things are really tough over there. We've lost so much business, and I'm in way over my head. Gerald and Martin are talking about layoffs." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I meant it. I didn't want to see good people lose their jobs because of leadership failures. "Would you consider hiring me?" he asked suddenly. "I know I got the promotion you should have had, and I know I wasn't ready for it. But I've learned a lot these past few months, and I think I could contribute to what you're building." This request caught me off guard. Blake had been the symbol of everything wrong with Stonebridge's promotion process, but he'd also been a victim of a system that set him up to fail. After some consideration, I offered him a position as a junior analyst, not the senior role he'd held at Stonebridge, but a chance to learn properly and earn advancement through actual competence. Blake accepted immediately and became one of Signal North's most dedicated employees. The experience had humbled him in ways that ultimately made him better at his job. The final act of this long drama came in June, almost exactly 1 year after my 12th rejection for promotion. Gerald called and asked if I'd be willing to meet for lunch to discuss a business opportunity. I agreed, curious to hear what he had in mind. We met at the same restaurant where I'd once celebrated other people's promotions, and Gerald looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past 12 months. The confident executive who'd dismissed my value was gone, replaced by someone who clearly understood how badly they'd miscalculated. "Matt, I'll cut to the chase," he said after ordering. "Stonebridge is in trouble. We've lost too much business, too much institutional knowledge. We need to explore strategic partnerships." "What kind of partnerships?" I asked, though I suspected where this was heading. "A merger, potentially, or an acquisition. Signal North has captured a significant portion of our former market share, and frankly, you understand our clients better than we do at this point." The irony was perfect. The company that had refused to promote me was now asking me to absorb them. "I appreciate the offer," I said, "but I'm not interested in acquiring Stonebridge. Signal North is built on a different model, leaner, more responsive, more focused on actual results rather than office politics." Gerald's face fell. "Matt, please, we made mistakes. I made mistakes. But there are good people at Stonebridge who don't deserve to lose their jobs because of leadership failures." He was right about the good people, and that consideration had already influenced my decision to hire Blake and several other former Stonebridge employees who'd reached out over the months. But acquiring Stonebridge would mean inheriting Gerald and Martin's leadership problems, not to mention their business practices and client relationships. "Gerald," I said finally, "the best thing I can do for those good people is to continue hiring them as they become available. But I'm not interested in preserving the system that created this situation in the first place." We finished lunch with polite conversation about industry trends and mutual acquaintances, but we both knew the real business was concluded. Stonebridge would have to find their own path forward, and I would continue building something better. 6 months later. Stonebridge Insight Group quietly closed its doors. Some employees found positions with competitors, others moved to different industries, and a few joined Signal North. Gerald and Martin both took early retirement, their reputations in the consulting world permanently damaged by their spectacular mismanagement of talent and client relationships. As for me, I learned something valuable about revenge during that year of transition. The most satisfying revenge isn't about destruction, it's about construction. building something better, something that makes the original look obsolete by comparison. I never set out to destroy Stonebridge. I set out to create value for myself and my clients, to build a company where talent was recognized and rewarded appropriately, where good work was acknowledged rather than appropriated. The fact that this success came at Stonebridge's expense was just a natural consequence of market forces. Today, Signal North Consulting employs 15 people and serves clients across 3 states. We've developed proprietary analysis tools that make our old Stonebridge methods look primitive. Our client retention rate is 98%, and our employee satisfaction surveys show results that would have been unthinkable in my previous work environment. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Gerald had promoted me on that 12th attempt. If they'd recognized my value before I recognized it myself, would I still be sitting in that squeaky chair, making other people look good while my own career stagnated? Probably. And that realization is both sobering and liberating. I learned that being indispensable to the wrong people is actually a trap, not an asset. True career security comes from being valuable to the market, not just to one employer who takes your contributions for granted. I also learned that professional revenge doesn't require burning bridges or destroying relationships. Sometimes the most devastating response to being undervalued is simply to take your value elsewhere and let the market decide what it's worth. The conference room where they delivered my 12th rejection is now someone else's problem. The flickering light they never bothered to fix has probably burned out completely by now, but I'm not there to see it, and that makes all the difference. Revenge isn't always about burning things down. Sometimes it's about building something better, just outside their reach, and watching them realize, too late, what they let slip through their fingers. The best part is, I don't need their validation anymore. I don't need their approval or their recognition. I built my own company where merit matters and good work is rewarded appropriately, where people like Blake can learn from their mistakes and grow into better professionals, where clients receive the quality service they pay for, delivered by people who actually understand their needs. That's not revenge, that's justice. And justice, I've learned, tastes much sweeter than any momentary satisfaction from burning bridges or settling scores. Gerald was right about one thing. I did understand their clients better than they did. I understood them well enough to serve them properly, which is something Stonebridge never quite figured out how to do. And in the end, that understanding became the foundation of everything I built afterward. So to anyone reading this who's been passed over, undervalued, or taken for granted, remember that your worth isn't determined by people who can't see it. Sometimes the best career move is the one that takes you away from people who don't appreciate what you bring to the table. Don't burn the bridges behind you. Build better ones ahead of you. The view from success is much more satisfying than the view from revenge, and the foundation is infinitely more solid. They passed me over for promotion 12 times. In the end, they did me the biggest favor of my professional life. They forced me to bet on myself. And that bet paid off in ways I never could have imagined while sitting in that squeaky chair, waiting for someone else to recognize my value. Now I recognize it myself, and that makes all the difference.